right, let's bring in South Carolina Senator and 2024 presidential candidate Tim Scott. Senator, good to be with you. Let me get you to react, first of all, to the fact that President Biden will be the first American president since 9/11 to not visit either Ground Zero or Shanksville or the Pentagon to commemorate the day. Instead, he's going to be at Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska, which is a typical refueling stop for Air Force One on its way back from an Asia trip. He couldn't make it back from Hanoi in time. You okay with that? Should he have left earlier to be here? What do you think?
Absolutely. Here's a day that we should remember as a day of American exceptionalism. 3,000 lives lost, but the most important and powerful image are the first responders running into danger, putting their lives at risk. American exceptionalism at its best. I would have wished the president would have been at the Pentagon talking to and celebrating people willing to lay their lives down for their country. The president should have left early enough to have been there at the Pentagon talking about American exceptionalism and why America continued to provide opportunities and to be the beacon of light, the city on the hill. But once again, President Biden is missing in action.
We saw him over the weekend, and the world seems to be talking about that newser in Vietnam where there was this awkward moment. Senator, listen.
Thank you again.
Okay, so we'll try to tee that back up for you there.
Speaking of awkward moments.
Yeah, speaking of awkward moments, we just had one. Senator, all right, so it seems we've re-racked it. Let's try again.
I see. I'm just following my orders here. I tell you what, I don't know about you, but I'm going to go to bed.
The president took 5 questions from reporters. He concluded with that by telling everybody he was going to bed. That was one of just several moments that seemed to really stop folks and ask what exactly is going on here and who's telling him what to do. Senator, what did you think when you saw that?
Well, TMI, too much information, number one. Number two, those synapses are not firing as quickly as we need them to be firing. His dereliction of duty is because of his incompetence. What we saw there was just embarrassing for the country, embarrassing again. I liken it to the moments that we've seen, whether it's tripping, whether it's the whole concept of walking and chewing gum. We need a president who's prepared to lead, not only to be the commander of the chief, but also to be the chief executive. You have to have the energy to do the job. And what we see on display time and time again is a president who seems to be fumbling the ball too close to the goal line. I will be the president that gets the job done. It's one of the reasons why I know America can do for anyone what she's done for me. But it is time for fresh, new, strong leadership.
You know, I went on several Asia trips with former President Trump during his administration. And whether it was a Kim Jong-un summit in Singapore, or whether it was a G20 summit or a NATO summit, he would take question after question after question. And sometimes he'd be up there for more than an hour answering questions. Never once did I hear him say, I don't know about you, but I'm going to bed. When the president is on the world stage like that, I mean, isn't it important for the president, who is the most powerful leader in the world, to project strength? Not, I need to have a cup of cocoa and climb between the sheets.
Well, one of the things I've been saying throughout Iowa, New Hampshire, on the campaign trail, it's not the strength of China. It is actually the weakness of Biden. It's not the strength of President Xi. It's not the strength of President Putin. It's literally the weakness of President Biden that puts us in jeopardy. The challenges that we see today can be absolutely changed if we didn't have a president in retreat. The good news is new leadership can turn that around. America is not a nation in decline, but under President Biden, we can feel that he is retreating from his responsibilities, that we are retreating from our values. We need strong, powerful, decisive leadership. I look forward to being that leader.
The California State Assembly, meanwhile, Senator Scott, I know you have strong feelings about this, has passed legislation now, it happened on Friday, that would require judges in child custody cases to consider whether a parent has affirmed a child's belief that they are indeed transgender. I know you're responding to this with one word, that this bill would punish parents
Evil.
in custody battles who don't affirm transgender kids. What is your thinking on this?
Well, I said it earlier and I'll say it again. That is evil personified in the hands of those legislators that did something that we've never seen in American history, literally taking away kids from their parents because the state of California believes that if you don't affirm the gender decisions of your child, it's abuse. That is evil. We should protect parents. If we want to protect kids, we have to empower parents. And as President of the United States, one of the things I would roll out immediately is a Parents' Bill of Rights. We are going to make sure that we empower parents to be the decision maker for their juvenile kids and not the state of California, not a General Assembly. I can't think of anything more unacceptable and more un-American than a state saying, if you don't actually affirm your child's gender decisions, we'll take your kids because they know how to raise your kids better than you do. That's offensive, it's dangerous, and it's evil. We have to stand as a nation against that vile behavior from the state Assembly in California.
Senator Tim Scott, great state of South Carolina, presidential candidate for 2024. Thank you for kicking us off this Monday. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.